Good morning, everyone, and I am delighted to welcome you this morning to Enterprise Ireland's roundtable themed Ireland and the US on Track to Getting Back. I am Julie Sinnamon, the CEO of Enterprise Ireland, and I'm delighted today to introduce our special guest on Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, someone who needs very little introduction. Micheál Martin has been serving as Taoiseach since June 2020 and has been a TD since 1989. And he is no stranger to Enterprise Ireland over that period, having held a number of key ministerial positions, including Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, Minister for Health and Children, and Minister for Education and Science. And I think it's no overstatement to say that in each of those ministries, the Taoiseach has left his unique mark. He is and always has been a champion for Irish enterprise and has made led several trade missions to the US over the years. And in fact, earlier today at a number of his previous speaking events, he's talked about the massive contribution of Irish FDI into the US. It's currently valued at in excess of $225 billion, a massive contribution by Irish companies to the US economy over the years. So without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our guest of honour and Taoiseach to address us. Thank you very much. You're very welcome, Taoiseach.
Thank you very much indeed, Julie, and thank you for your kind comments. And can I begin by wishing you all a happy St. Patrick's Day tomorrow. It is a pleasure to be sharing the virtual stage today with such an esteemed group of speakers. Diane, Ambassador Mulhall, Julie, Robert and Steve. I look forward to sharing some thoughts today, and I wish you the best for what I am sure will be an excellent event. It is a shame, of course, not to be able to travel this year, but I look forward to visiting and meeting in person when circumstances permit. COVID-19 has affected all aspects of our lives. It has been a very difficult year for us all. And now that we are rolling vaccines out, we can begin to turn our focus to the future with more confidence. We are not there yet, far from it, but we do have legitimate grounds for hope. How the US, the EU, and Ireland can cooperate in driving economic recovery will be an important focus in the discussions I will be having with US leaders this week. The United States is Ireland's largest single trading partner and biggest source of investment. Similarly, Ireland, while 1/70th the size of the United States in population terms, is your 9th biggest source of foreign direct investment. I know I don't have to tell this audience that there are over 800 American companies present in Ireland, employing 180,000 people, and that in the other direction, there are over 650 Irish companies in America, employing 110,000 people. From a trade perspective, Ireland exports over 45 billion euro worth of goods to America each year, while America exports over 50 billion euro worth of services to Ireland. This reflects the highly integrated and mutually beneficial relationship between our two economies. There is a trust and confidence in our capacity to deliver mutual benefit, built up over many decades of successful and growing trade. At the heart of this is our Irish and American businesses that export, invest, and innovate across our two nations. Clearly, the transatlantic relationship as a pillar of the global economy has enormous potential to help us on both sides of the Atlantic to build back better, to borrow President Biden's phrase. The extraordinary supports put in place in the United States and Europe have helped protect incomes and livelihoods and will ensure that our economies return to growth. At the European Union end, 1.8 trillion euros from the Multi-Financial Framework and Recovery and Resilience Fund has been put in place to complement the significant investment that member states have made. In Ireland, significant fiscal supports, which our finance ministry estimate may reach as much as 38 billion euro over the course of the pandemic, are being invested to protect jobs, incomes, and public health. In the United States, you now have the $1.9 trillion stimulus package in place. As we move towards recovery, we now need to work together to maximize and amplify the impact. The pandemic has delivered a severe economic shock across the world. It has affected everyone, some more than others. Ireland was fortunate that it entered the pandemic in a position of strength, with a fast-growing economy, a labour market nearing full employment, and a stable fiscal position. That has helped us to weather the storm. While we continue to battle with the pandemic, our economic performance has thankfully remained strong. Knowledge-intensive sectors have proved resilient, and as a result of the strength of exports, particularly in the med, pharma, and ICT sectors, GDP actually grew in 2020. Our domestic sectors, however, took a harder hit, especially tourism, hospitality, entertainment, and aviation. Before COVID, Ireland attracted over 2 million visitors from North America and was the 6th most popular destination for US students seeking to study abroad. We are very much looking forward to opening our doors again when it is safe to do so and welcoming Americans back to our shores. We have also had to prepare for and manage the United Kingdom's exit from the European Union, which took real effect at the start of this year. It was late December before we knew that it would happen on agreed terms, with a trade and cooperation agreement secured at almost the very last minute. The agreement avoids tariffs and quotas on EU-UK trade in goods, and thus mitigates some of the most severe potential impacts for Ireland. However, the fact that the United Kingdom decided not just to leave the European Union, but also its single market and its customs union, means that there has been an inevitable increase in trade friction for both business and consumers, with a requirement for more checks, more controls, more bureaucracy. Ireland is, however, deeply committed to working closely with Britain to ensure as close a relationship as possible. Despite the difficult circumstances of the last year, from both COVID-19 and Brexit, Irish companies continue to succeed in the US by offering world-class product and service solutions, many supported by the Enterprise Ireland teams in Ireland and in the US. One prominent example is ICON's recent acquisition of contract research organisation PRA Health Sciences in a deal worth approximately $12 billion. This is a substantial acquisition for ICON, which will now be in a position to offer both PRA's mobile and connected health platforms, real-world data and information solutions, with its own Accela Care site network, home health services, and wearable expertise. I want to congratulate ICON's Chief Executive Officer, Steve Cutler, as he leads the continued success of ICON, and to assure Steve that we want to support your continued growth any way we can. Other Irish companies have played an important role in the United States' fight against COVID-19. Nearform is one of many examples, having supplied the technology for New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware's track and tracing apps. Verify, the mobile health passport from Irish biometric identity assurance specialist Diane, is used by American Airlines to confirm travelers have met COVID-19 testing requirements. Additionally, Let's Get Checked has produced an at-home COVID-19 testing kit, allowing Americans to test themselves for COVID-19 in the safety of their own homes. Ireland was ranked 6th in the global market of countries responding best in terms of innovation to the pandemic. We were also ranked as the 5th top global exporter of COVID-related goods by the OECD last year, and we played a vital role in keeping medical goods moving through the global supply chain. So today is an opportunity for us all to acknowledge and to commend the positive impact that Irish companies are making in the United States and right across the world. That this was achieved through a time of national lockdown and in the face of greatly diminished air transport routes makes it all the more impressive. Ireland proved itself to be a trusted partner to international trading partners, and none more so than the United States. Building back better is a key goal for President Biden, and Ireland and Irish companies will do all we can to support that goal. Enterprise Ireland is launching an international green innovation campaign, Ready for a Green Future, showcasing the Irish innovators who are delivering sustainable and low carbon solutions. The campaign focuses on the climate agenda, and as the world emerges from COVID-19, Irish research, innovation and new technologies can play a vital role in enabling a greener future. At a time when there is a strong focus on a green recovery across the world and in Ireland, this St. Patrick's Day, we are showcasing some of Ireland's best green innovators and actors in our research and innovation ecosystem. These extraordinary individuals are enabling industries such as agriculture, construction, and transport to be more sustainable. They're making buildings greener, cutting pollution, and supporting renewable energy production. So as we look to the future, as we get ready for a new world, ready to develop the industries of tomorrow and create high-paying jobs, we stand, as we've long done, as a firm partner with the United States. On St. Patrick's Day, it is the tradition that the Irish Taoiseach presents a bowl of shamrock to the President of the United States as a symbol of our extraordinary friendship. I will be doing so tomorrow when I meet President Biden. This year, those green shamrock shoots will not only represent the uniqueness of the relationship Ireland and the US enjoy, but also the extraordinary human capacity to endure and to recover. Ireland and the United States, as close partners, can chart a better future together as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. We point to a green recovery, as together we lead the way in delivering an innovative, sustainable, low-carbon recovery. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you all.
Thank you, Taoiseach. And you have referred to the pandemic, and 2020 has undoubtedly been a very challenging year globally. But can I ask you, as you reflect on 2020, what were some of the key learnings from Ireland's experience that you feel will power Ireland into a stronger 2021 and beyond?
Well, I think one of the key learnings, first of all, is the reaffirmation of a long-held belief that we are interdependent now in the world. Supply chains are global, and there is really strong interdependence. So we cannot deal with this COVID-19 crisis without strengthening that interdependence, and that's one key lesson. Secondly, the potential for digitalization has been, I think, accelerated through our experiences during COVID-19. So as part of our National Economic Recovery Plan, we're looking at digital transformation to a much greater degree, and then perhaps we had anticipated prior to the pandemic. And nowhere is that more manifest than in our health service. And I think coming out of COVID, there will be a renewed appreciation for our national public health service, but also an understanding that we need to do more. We need to embed some of the reforms that we've experienced during COVID, particularly the technology reforms, the emphasis on community and primary care and so forth, that we need to embed those now in a sustainable way into our future health service. And that's one key lesson I think we have learned coming out of COVID-19. And in line with the poster behind you, I think the COVID, because of the nature of it, a pandemic, a once in a century event, brings home the force of nature. And perhaps, I think in an underlying way, will strengthen the whole impetus towards a green future. And so as part of our economic recovery plan, the second key theme will be the green economy and how we move much faster now in terms of dealing with the climate change issue, both as a country and I think through Europe and with President Biden's administration, clearly through the US as well, in terms of a joint up approach to climate change.
Thank you, Taoiseach. And during your your address, you talked about your meeting tomorrow, which is very exciting for you and for all of us with President Biden. And I know you have a number of other important meetings with Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, and other key US officials. And I suppose, what do you feel is so special about this US-Ireland relationship that you want to communicate in your meetings tomorrow?
Well, I think first of all, President Biden has a deep affection for Ireland and for his Irish roots, and he's a genuinely, I suppose, the most Irish American president since President John F. Kennedy. And when I spoke to him after his success in November, that warmth and affection was very, very clear. So it represents an opportunity to deepen the relationship, strengthen it, particularly on the economic front and indeed on the cultural and literary front as well. I'm looking forward to that dimension of our relationship being strengthened into the future as well. And we're looking forward to meeting with Speaker Pelosi and the Friends of Ireland, who've been so helpful to us along with President Biden, during the Brexit negotiations and discussions, and with peace in Ireland uppermost in their minds. And of course, we're looking forward to meeting with Vice President Harris, and together we're both meeting some Frederick Douglass scholars, as a scholarship program has been developed between the US now and Ireland. And the Vice President and I will have the opportunity to meet with the first number of graduates chosen tomorrow. And I think that again brings another dimension to our relationship, both representing the diversity of Irish America today and also the diversity of modern Ireland. And then recalling the visit of Frederick Douglass to Ireland and his great meeting with Daniel O'Connell, who was his hero, the great Irish liberator. And I think it sort of illustrates that meeting between Vice President Harris and I kind of illustrates the bond. The most fundamental part of our relationship and bond is the commitment to freedom, the most fundamental freedoms that humankind can enjoy, and the values we respectively place on freedom of speech, the dignity of each human being, and the need to work towards nurturing that and making it a core part of our democracies.
Thank you, Taoiseach. And I know that you have a hectic schedule and a busy day and a really important day tomorrow. And it's fantastic to see it proceeding despite the restrictions that we have. And it is a day to celebrate these special relationships. I know you have to leave us at this stage. So I would like to thank you on behalf of everyone here this afternoon, just for taking the time out of the schedule to join us. Wish you good luck tomorrow. And I will now pass over to our moderator for the afternoon, Diane Brady. So thank you very much, Taoiseach.
Thank you very much indeed, Julie. Appreciate that.
Hello, everyone. How are you? And early happy St. Patrick's Day. Thank you very much, Julie, and thank you, of course, to the Taoiseach. I'm Diane Brady. Looking forward to a great conversation, and I'm going to invite my panelists to come join us. In addition to Julie, I'm going to label everybody as they come up. We have Bob Wolcott, who is the co-founder and chairman of the World Innovation Network and also a professor at the Kellogg School of Management. Steve Cutler, whom the Taoiseach mentioned during the call. Hello, Steve, who is the CEO of ICON. And last, but certainly not least, we have Dan Mulhall, who is Ireland's ambassador to the US. Ambassador Mulhall, we're going to start with you. The Taoiseach alluded to this, but why don't you tell us a little bit about the current state of the US-Ireland relationship?
It's in great shape, really is in great shape. I can hardly think it could be any better. I mean, clearly we have a relationship with the United States that stretches back across the centuries, forged by generations of Irish immigrants who came here. And that link has been redoubled and reinforced by the extraordinary business links that have been created over the last half century, and in particular over the last 20 years. And in particular now in more recent times, when we've seen a great influx of investment from Ireland into the United States, innovative Irish companies who, you know, grow themselves in Ireland initially and maybe move into European markets. But then when they want to expand their operations internationally, become genuine international companies, the US is a very attractive market for them. And so many of them are now coming into the US. Every year when we have a Select USA organized here by the American authorities to attract foreign investment, Ireland, the last few years, has had one of the biggest delegations of all, despite the fact that we're a small country. I've met so many Irish companies that are looking to come into this market. I believe that last year there was something in excess of 70 companies came in, despite the pandemic. Imagine that, companies still looking for opportunities. And I think I expect, given the way the relationship has gone during the last year, it's continued to develop in a very positive way in the last year. I think when the pandemic is behind us, we will see another spurt, another boost in the Irish-US economic relationship. And then finally, of course, the election of President Joe Biden is a big boost for us, because there's somebody who, throughout his political life, going back 4 decades, has identified very strongly with Ireland. And having somebody like that at the helm in the United States will be a further, I think, a further sort of boost to an already unique and thriving economic relationship between Ireland and the United States. Not that, regardless of who's in office here in the White House, our relations have been strong with Democrats, Republicans. Different presidents over the years have put themselves forward and have promoted this relationship, especially this time of year for St. Patrick's Day. But having somebody like President Biden, who has a genuine affection, a genuine sense of the strength of his Irish heritage and a pride in that heritage, is going to make the coming years, I think, in the Irish-US relationship even more special.
Right. Steve, one of those innovative Irish companies is your own. And I have to ask, in addition to having made a very big acquisition lately, you're in the US. What advantage, if any, do you have being an Irish company? Does it make a difference?
I think it does make a difference, Diane. Yes, it's interesting we contemplated this acquisition, and the Taoiseach kindly mentioned that we've spent about $12 billion in acquiring PRA, and we've significantly strengthened our links with the United States. We go from about 5,000 employees in the United States to when we close, sometime in Q3, almost 14,000 employees in the United States. So there's a real significant increase in terms of focus link. Of course, the US being the largest pharmaceutical market in the world. But I think the cultural aspects of it were very important. Interestingly, PRA is led by a Scotsman. I happen to be an Australian, and of course, we're a proudly Irish company. So you come back to the old joke, the Australian, the Scotsman, and the Irishman walked into a bar, and
always ends well
with a $12 billion deal. It was very important. Clinical development is global in scale. And so it's not one country or another, although, of course, the United States is very important. Europe is very important, but it's the rest of the world. Latin America, Asia is a growing market, China, Japan. So we need to be a global organization. And the cultural fits really happen across a number of different geographies and cultures. And the Irish culture, I think, with its openness, with its multiculturalism, it's a culture that I think embraces other cultures, welcomes other cultures, doesn't feel threatened by other cultures and other ways of doing things. I think that's reflected in Irish society. And for me, it was a really important part of doing this acquisition with the company we did it with.
Great. Julie, one of the things that actually I have to admit I was shocked by, I didn't realize that Enterprise Ireland is the world's largest VC investor. Is that correct? Can you tell us a little bit about the philosophy behind that?
Okay, good question, Diane. And it's something that may have surprised or even shocked you, but it's something that surprises most people. So Enterprise Ireland has recently been confirmed as the #1 investor globally in terms of deal flow. So, and that's basically, if you're trying to grow, our job is to grow Irish companies of scale. And if you want to grow Irish companies, you invest and you support existing companies, and you also keep bringing into the market new startup companies. And Enterprise Ireland has been investing in Irish companies for over 30 years. We have worked with companies like Icon, which is obviously the poster child of Irish companies in terms of what's possible on a global stage. But the one thing that we are doing is working with companies with a view to growing an Irish, being in control of our own destiny and growing great Irish companies of scale. So that's the thinking that we have. So it's about picking the teams initially, because obviously the teams are critical in this. And secondly, innovation. If companies are going to succeed in global markets, they have to have products and services which are solving problems that other people haven't been able to solve, and that, or else doing it better. And that's the innovation agenda is something, and despite the different issues throughout the last 2 decades in the Irish economy, the government have continued to put significant funding into research and innovation within our third level and institutes of technology to make sure that the innovation is coming through. And obviously we've got a great group of multinational companies, many of which come from the US in Ireland. And it's the two things working together which are providing the sort of melting pot for new innovative Irish companies.
So that's a natural segue to you, Bob, with the World Innovation Network, Twin Global. One of the things that we've seen, certainly in recent months, is a bigger role for government. Is government going to be taking a bigger role in innovation? Can you just talk a little bit about what the buzz is in your own network?
Sure, thanks, Diane, and thanks to all the panelists. I'm happy to answer that question, but before I do, I want to clarify something that Steve said. He mentioned that an Irishman, a Scot, and an Aussie walked into a bar as a joke. That's just a statement of fact. That's really not a joke. So now that we have that cleared up, yes, I mean, government in a crisis naturally takes on larger roles with good and bad outcomes alike. So that's a natural dynamic you see throughout history. But in Twin, one of the things we've been interested in for a long time, and I've been traveling over the world and interested in various approaches to economics, development, innovation, the role of government, the role of the private sector. And one of the things we've been interested in a long time is how smaller economies punch above their weight, how they do creative, dynamic, resourceful things in order to play critical roles in the world, not just to do a little bit better or export a little bit more, but a lot more. And I want to say one standard bearer in the world, I think, is Enterprise Ireland. I know that having had a relationship with Ireland now for probably almost 20 years, anytime I need something from Ireland, I know to reach out to the team at Enterprise Ireland. It's a fantastic connecting point. You know, you look at countries like Singapore, the Nordic countries, Estonia. I've spent a lot of time with Estonia. I'm talking to the Prime Minister of Serbia tomorrow. And each of these countries takes a little bit different approach. And one of the things that's quite exciting about Ireland is that the country has done a number of things very well. It's not just one. It's not just investing in innovation or startups, which is great. And Julie's comment about scale is the challenge for smaller economies. But they looked at how others have tried to do it and then took their own way with that. We're talking about as well the way that Ireland engages the diaspora around the world. The way that Ireland said, can we do anything with our tax law, and the way that we welcome foreign countries and engage the European Union. So the last thing I'd say is, we might forget this, but I think Ireland gained a lot of social and financial capital in the world of trust because of the way the country navigated the global financial crisis. So when the chips were down during the financial crisis, Ireland was hit very hard. And I know it impacted a lot of people who noticed that Ireland bit the bullet and plowed through and did the right thing over and over again. And that comes back and pays benefits to the country. So I've been a big fan of Ireland for some time.
Well, if you're not a fan or a friend of Ireland, of course, you have no heart. So that's a given, I think, on this call. It was my last trip before the pandemic. So to me, Ireland is also freedom. I want to talk a little bit about the pandemic. And Steve, naturally, you've been sort of on the front lines of this to a large extent. What do you think the impact of COVID and the pandemic is having on business in general, and certainly the relationship that we're talking about here today?
Yeah, we have had a big impact, or at least been very much involved, Diane, as you said, in the pandemic, in terms of the vaccines and helping with the development of those vaccines and the treatments there. You know, the pandemic, let's be honest, has been a tragedy from a health worldwide health point of view. You know, many people lost, and it's been very significant, I think, for everyone. It's really been a global tragedy. Having said that, there are opportunities that are coming out of it. And certainly in our business, we're in the clinical trials business, you know, we've seen opportunities to deploy technology that we haven't seen before. We probably accelerated that by 5 to 10 years, I think, and it remains to be seen. We need to, you know, to continue to push that as we come out of the pandemic. There's always a little bit of a tendency to revert to where we used to be, whatever normal was. But we have, I think, a real opportunity in our industry and our business to take a lead now, and that's one of the reasons for making the acquisition that we did with PRA. We now become the second largest clinical development organization in the world, number one in a number of the segments. And we really have an opportunity as an Irish multinational to lead the world in the clinical development space, to lead the world in decentralized clinical trials. Everybody knows what a clinical trial is now. Even my mother knows what I do now for the first time in 30 years. So it's one, we have a real opportunity, I think, to involve more people in the benefits of clinical trials, to have clinical trials as a treatment option as they go to their doctors, and to democratize, I think, the clinical trial opportunity, I suppose. And that really excites me, I think, as we come out of this pandemic and we see those sort of tailwinds behind us.
Ambassador Mulhall, I'd love to hear you weigh in on this, because obviously the world is very different today than it was 12 months ago. What sense do you have of both the opportunities and the challenges right now for Irish companies, and also just for building business in general?
Well, I agree with Steve that the first thing you have to say about the pandemic is it's been a disaster for the world. I mean, so many lives lost, so many livelihoods destroyed. I mean, our economy actually grew last year, that Taoiseach has said, but you know, parts of the economy certainly have been ravaged by, you know, by the impact of the virus. So I think, I personally think that this is like being through a war of some kind. I mean, obviously it's a different kind of story, but I do think that there will be a determination on the part of people the world over to get back to where we were before. I mean, I think that's what happens in all tragedies. You know, if you have a sort of a natural disaster or whatever, people in a way redouble their efforts to just get back to normal life. And I always say to people that normal life may not have seemed that attractive or exciting a year and a half ago, but it sounds like heaven on earth at this stage, shall we say. So I do expect that we will see a surge of I think the human spirit will actually manifest itself in spades over the next year or so as we, you know, recover from the pandemic. And I expect that to have an effect across the board. I hope we will see, for example, greater international coming together to prepare for the possibility of a pandemic hitting us again in the future. And who knows what's out there in the kind of virus world. And we know now how deadly and how destructive these things can be. So I hope it will bring people together. Of course, there's always a risk that it will drive people apart, that, you know, vaccine nationalism will sow the seeds of difficulties for the future. And then, of course, there's Brexit in the Irish case. But I'm usually an optimist, but I think in the situation we're in at the moment, I think optimism is a reasonable option. It's a reasonable hope to have that there will be a better future, because we've had such a terrible time over the last year. I think there will be, I think that the human ability to innovate, which we've seen in the development of vaccines and treatments, for example, I think that will see us through, and that will I think open new vistas for businesses. I mean, obviously there is a danger of a kind of a reversion and a kind of a moving back into silos. But I do think, and certainly the Biden administration has made it clear that they wish America to become part of a global effort to find solutions rather than to retreat into national silos where, frankly, the solutions are not likely to be very effective nor very long lasting.
Rob, I see you nodding your head there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Diane. Ambassador, I couldn't agree more. And I'd like to add another twist to this. In January, I wrote an article in Forbes called The Great Unwinding. And one of the things that I pointed out in that article is that this year, over this next year, 18 months, whatever it is, will be the last first reopening after a pandemic of our lifetimes. So, I mean, this might be only the first of reopenings. We might have a pandemic in 5 years or 7 years. Who knows? God willing, we won't. But this is the last first reopening after a pandemic. So all of the objectives and the optimism that the ambassador articulated, we need to leverage. We need to figure out how to leverage this truly unique moment and all the potential energy. And the great unwinding is that we're all wound like tight springs. And when those springs are released, there'll be an enormous amount of energy that's released and will need to be channeled. It'll be chaotic. It won't be a linear process, but it is now that we have to prepare the ground to be more effective, more resilient, more evolvable in the future.
So, Julie, I want to go to you next. And I think that Rob touches on a really important point, because we've seen this wave of innovation, whether it's the acceleration of digitization and such. So as we talk about a return to normality, I'm curious about the trends you're seeing in innovation. You've got, obviously a green future behind you. What else are you seeing in terms of what Irish companies, where they're focused and where they have particular strengths?
Well, Diane, certainly, and the green future is obviously something which I believe is going to impact on every sector. It isn't just the companies that are selling green, but it is something which is being brought to the boardroom table of every company in Ireland and globally at this stage. The whole digitalization of companies is something which we're seeing is providing big opportunity, as is green. I mean, we have a fantastic group of companies in the green space that are bringing energy efficiency and environmentally friendly products and services around the world. And I think that will obviously continue. And, just going back to the point that the ambassador talked about in terms of optimism in the face of the pandemic, what we saw was really great examples across every part of Irish enterprise, stepping up, bringing innovation to the table. The Taoiseach mentioned Nearform earlier today, which was a small startup software company, and they saw the opportunity. They developed the contact tracing app, which is the most widely used contact tracing app globally. Steve referred to working from home. Within a weekend, effectively, the world changed and we all became part of this massive global social experiment. And I think we've seen great opportunity there with the whole cybersecurity side. People suddenly became very worried about the security of their information and data. So there have been, new groups of clusters of companies that have grown up in Ireland in response to this. Actually, on that virtual world that we all participated in, and obviously, we're exporting from Ireland. We see Ireland as the center of the world. Other people draw a globe differently. But actually, when we have talked to companies in Ireland in the wake of the pandemic who are maybe exporting to New Zealand, Australia, etc., because of the lack of access of any companies to markets around the world, it's been a great leveler. And that has actually completely transformed the mindset of many of our companies in terms of saying that we can actually develop business globally, virtually. And I know we're all itching to get back on planes and to get back in front of customers, etc. But there is a whole new sector built up in terms of the whole virtualization of the event business, for example, because we aren't going back to where we were. And that has provided opportunity. So I would say the whole green, digitalization, cyber, lots across every sector, we have seen areas of opportunity growing up.
I mean, I have to say that a virtual St. Patrick's Day, there's something a bit wistful about that, Julie. I have to admit. And you mentioned remote work and how life has changed. And I want to go to you, Steve, because I'm curious, both from your leadership style and such. You alluded to Irish culture earlier. I'd love to hear you talk more about that, but also just a little bit about how you've been working over this year. How do you lead a company remotely, and you know, how are you doing? You're in New York right now, is that correct?
I'm in Philadelphia.
You're in Philadelphia.
Diane. And it's been an interesting, let me say, an interesting time, to say the least. We went from literally this time last year about 60% of our 15,000 employees being in the office, to literally a couple of weeks later, probably 95% of them working from home. And our IT group, our technology group, did a terrific job in just equipping them simply to be able to do that, because not everybody had a laptop or the facility to do that. And even in countries, we were around the world, countries like India, Asia, Latin America, we were able to do that. So it really goes to I think the quality of our employees and their ability and their willingness to lift and shift and to be incredibly agile. No credit to me at this one. Really is our employees just embraced the challenge and got down to it, realized that we have, as you run clinical trials around the world, you have a responsibility to the patients that are in those trials to make sure they stay safe, that the data that is collected is real and has complete integrity. And that's our job, to make sure that we do that. And as it gets submitted, and the COVID vaccine is a good example, as that gets submitted to regulatory authorities who were very accommodating in the whole process, that data needs to be absolutely pristine. And I was able to stand up and say, absolutely, we got some great compliments from FDA as that large vaccine trial was submitted about the data and the quality of the data and how it was collected. And that's really just a tribute to our employees and how they were able to really, as I say, shift and pivot so quickly, and to be able to continue monitoring and managing those trials that we have running, and to keep those patients safe. So I was very proud of our organization throughout that time.
So Ambassador Mulhall, I often think you can continue a relationship virtually. It's hard to start one, and so the art of diplomacy during this period. How have you been? A little bit about your work in terms of the U.S.-Ireland relationship, and as we've shifted to this remote environment, Julie talked about the leveling effect. What impact do you think it's had on just the ability of business to grow, but also your own job? I'm curious to know how you've been doing it during this past 12 months.
Well, of course, the pandemic started this time last year, and in fact, the then Taoiseach Leo Varadkar was here on a visit, and he announced the first phase of the Irish lockdown from the steps of the government guest house here, Blair House in Washington, D.C. And when he left that evening, I accompanied him to the airport. That was my last time at an airport, by the way, since then. So that's quite a new thing for me. Look, we had to adapt. Look, like the companies around the world who had to adapt to new circumstances, we had to do the same thing. There's no point in going around saying what a dreadful thing this is. We had to find a way of doing our job without being able to meet face-to-face with people. And diplomacy is a face-to-face business. And we have, I'm delighted to say, and thanks to my colleagues all over the United States, all of them have applied themselves with great diligence and great innovative skills over the last year to doing their jobs without being able to have gatherings of any more than a handful of people. So I spent my last year on permanent webinars and Zoom calls. I was fortunate that I had built up a good set of contacts here over the preceding two and a half years. And therefore I was able to go back and engage with those people. The loss that I feel there has been in the last year, and I think this is probably applies to business as well, is the serendipity of meeting people at events. You go to an event, there are 100 people or more, maybe 1,000 people there, and you bump into somebody quite by accident, And they turn out to be either someone you're going to do business with, or in my case, someone that can be helpful to the pursuit of Ireland's diplomatic mission. And it's that serendipity that we've missed over the last year, that not meeting people casually. I mean, the number of new people I've met in the last year, I could count them on the fingers of my two hands, right? Because that option has been excluded to us. And that is something I'm just yearning to get back to again, to sort of, to have those serendipitous experiences again, where you meet someone and suddenly a new world opens up to you. And I think that is something that probably is one of the things that business people have been missing too, because they haven't been able to come and meet people. And it's a great tribute to businesses that have been able to keep going, that have been able to develop their businesses.
And grown, yeah.
Without being able to have face-to-face contact, without being able to visit the markets that they would have done in the past. And that's why I think that when we are able to have these face-to-face activities again, it will be a great joy for us. And I think it will be a productive experience, because we will learn again the value of people-to-people contacts, which we haven't been able to have in the same way over the past year.
Diane, could I add something to the ambassador?
Of course.
Serendipity is a hot button for me. At Twin, we say never leave serendipity to chance. And
it's your business model.
That is. And we do a lot of other things. I won't go into it now, but one of the things that we're starting, and in fact, later this month, we'll have our first, April Fool's Day, April 1st, we'll have our first serendipity call. And what is serendipity call? It's a Zoom meeting, and everybody signs up not knowing who they're going to meet. And by the way, it's an invitation-only community, so whoever it is that's in Twin is going to be interesting. And I'm going to bring everybody together and drop them into random rooms, and they're going to meet for a little bit and then come back, and then they're going to drop in again and meet for a little bit. And as Dan said, that's certainly fun, but there's also a business purpose to it, because it does unlock doors you didn't even know existed. And so we can do some of that online. It's not as good as when you're in person at a program, but we can find ways to leverage new technologies to be more effective at that kind of serendipitous engagement.
Julie, do you have any advice for people on this call who, whether they've been, locked in their bedroom as a startup, or, boldly going forward with growing their business at this juncture right now, in terms of how they can both leverage Enterprise Ireland, but also continue to grow now that we're almost talking about a post-pandemic phase? A little premature perhaps, but what advice are you telling people that come through your office?
Well, I think first of all, my first advice to everybody is to reach out and to use all the supports that are available. Very often people aren't as aware as they should be of the potential supports that are there. And actually in the last year, it has probably been more important than ever for people, given that they weren't able to travel into market. The need to get that constant flow of information from the marketplace has never been stronger. So our international network have been really actively working, trying to be that bridge between Irish companies and clients in the market to get that information in both directions. Obviously, for people who are in their bedrooms and working, and I think what this has done, and particularly for Enterprise Ireland with the whole regional agenda, where companies are operating, and previously thought that everything had to happen in the one building. And there is such an openness now to being able to, people potentially working in Dublin a couple of days a week and living down the country and having a different lifestyle. So I think there is a real opportunity for us to reimagine what the future might be as a result of what has happened over the last year. I'm talking to the most traditional companies in Ireland, and they probably previously felt if you weren't in the office, you couldn't work from home, you'd probably be sitting watching Netflix. And suddenly they realized that it has opened up the talent pool right across the country for them to be able to access. So I think that people need to take stock, they need to actually reflect. I think we are living on the back of the relationships of the past, which is one of the concerns that many businesses have at this stage. that they've been able to continue to do businesses around the world with existing customers. It is much harder to develop from scratch new clients, even though we've great examples of where that has happened. So I would be encouraging companies, and we are seeing an opening up. There's money, governments across the world are putting budgets in to try to reactivate economies. And I think with that will come opportunity, and we will see an increase in demand in many marketplaces, and people now have to be ready to avail of those opportunities. So I think, there's never been a curve that didn't turn, and I would be telling people to get ready at this stage for that upsurge in demand, which will come, and it will be a different world than we might have been living for the last year. We'll appreciate a lot of things. Last year, the last night I had in Washington, Steve and I were at an Ireland Funds dinner, and little did we know a year later it would be our last business dinner for that period. So it has been a tough year, but actually there's a lot of optimism across industry in Ireland that that the companies have survived this. They have innovated despite this. They've continued to grow their sales, and I think those opportunities now, as the vaccines come on board, and that companies will be able to avail of the growth.
Great. Well, and a shout out to traditional companies as I drink from my Balik mug here. So, and as you mentioned, Street, we cannot talk about normal life without, of course, thanking normal people for getting us through the pandemic. But Steve, let me go to you. I'm curious about what difference it makes as, you are apolitical, I'll say, and in terms of the relationship itself. Does it make a big difference to you and your ability to grow the strength of the relationship between governments and say Ireland and the US? How does that impact you?
Oh, very significantly, Diane. There's no question. But on a very sort of tactical regulatory process, the FDA, the EMA, the MHRA, all of the regulatory bodies around the world, to the extent that they can cooperate and collaborate more efficiently and to a greater extent, really makes our business much more efficient. And I extend that to the pharmaceutical industry as well. Clinical development becomes a much more global enterprise as regulatory bodies are more consistent in terms of what they wish to see to get a new drug to market safely and with the appropriate efficacy data. So collaboration between governments is absolutely critical in our business, and it really gives our business a significant tailwind going forward. Having said, and as I look to the experiences of the pandemic, they really showed that they could step up incredibly well. We had protocols that would normally take 3 to 6 months to get approval, being approved over a weekend, literally. And I'm not sure that that's going to continue, at that sort of speed going forward. However, they've shown, as have our sponsors, as have the sites and investigators that we work with, as has our industry, that we can do things more effectively and more efficiently when we really put our minds to it. There's a lot of white space in some of the processes that we implement. And if we really focus our minds, as was focused during the pandemic, of course, there's a lot we can do to collaborate more effectively, not just in terms of governments and countries, but in terms of industries, sponsors, customers, investigator sites, and ultimately patients. We want to get new drugs and devices to patients more effectively, and that's a big part of it.
So, Ambassador, I haven't seen a lot of rallying around globalization over the past year. There's been a lot of rhetoric, buy American, buy Ireland. That national pride, is it mutually exclusive to building stronger relationships, or do you see it as in some ways complementary? I mean, as we think about the relationship, there's a lot of focus right now on investing in our home markets to get these economies going again.
Well, I don't see any problem with combining national pride with international cooperation. I mean, I'm a diplomat now of more than 4 decades standing. I've represented Ireland all over the world during that time. And I am the proudest of, the most patriotic of Irishmen you could meet. And I get a genuine kick, even now, after 40 years, out of representing my country. But that doesn't stop me from also being a very proud European. You'll see the European Union flag in the background here. And it doesn't prevent me from having an international, a global outlook on things. So essentially, I think when it comes to a country's international policies, the policies have to make sense to the country itself, because if they don't make sense in that domain, then they're not going to survive. They're not going to be effective. But we're all part, and we know from bitter experience that we're all part of a global community. So talking about the Irish advantage, as Enterprise Ireland does, and promoting Irish products doesn't mean that we have some kind of, we're trying to put a hex on the products of other countries. Not at all.
No need.
So, so the point is that when you talk up the Irish advantage, as we do, and that's part of my job, and it's part of what Enterprise Ireland is there to do. We're also, I think, all aware of another similar phrase called comparative advantage, which may be an old-fashioned idea, but it's still there. So there are certain things that we in Ireland don't produce and never will produce. I don't ever see us being a country that produces, wide-bodied aircraft, for example, or cars in large numbers. But I do see us as a country that produces some of the stuff that goes into making those wide-body aircraft effective and efficient and so forth. And I do see us already producing stuff that make the automobile industry turn over well. So there is absolutely nothing to fear from countries seeking their own advantage in the international arena, provided that they all have a sensible view that the international environment cannot be a dog eat dog. It must be dog work with other dogs in order to get us all to the place we want to be in the future.
Can I come in that, Diane? Because, US foreign direct investment has been really good for Ireland. And I think that's something that we all acknowledge and appreciate. And it's only in latter years that we have spent so much effort talking about the two-way street. And I think the fact that there's 650 Irish companies employing 110,000 people in the US, that's a phenomenal contribution from any company to the US economy, not to mention a small country the size of Ireland. So I think the whole chain, we can focus on exports into Ireland and out of Ireland. And I think, that we talked earlier about the fantastic acquisition by ICON of PRA Health Sciences. A 12 billion acquisition. I mean, it is an absolutely phenomenal achievement by any company, not to mention a great Irish company. So I think we shouldn't just think about bringing stuff in, and there are some things that you can do in Ireland and export, and there are other things that actually you have to go into the market to really be able to do it. We've had great Irish companies that have gone. Kerry Group, for example, has gone to the US, has developed a really strong position in the US. Then they come back to Ireland and they established their European global headquarters, bringing the best of what they acquired in terms of knowledge transfer with them into Ireland, and creating a fantastic European headquarters and growing their European operations. So I think we have to look at the bigger picture in terms of the flows in both directions, and it isn't just about imports and exports. It's about the total relationships between the two countries. Yeah. And I think as Irish people, we today are really proud about the contribution to the US, as well as that contribution from the US to Ireland. So I think, and the pandemic has possibly taken us a step back in terms of nationalism and people wanting to be self-sufficient in these times, etc. But I think, the world is, on a direction, and on these global relationships and global companies such as ICON and their achievements in the US are by having that presence in the US and going from 5,000 to 14,000 employees in the US. Again, a fantastic achievement.
And it speaks to the investment in talent, I think, Julie, which is something that was mentioned earlier about even just from the financial crisis and how Ireland bounced back. Robert, before we go to some final comments, Rob, I'd love to get your thoughts on that talent question, because investing in education is so important right now. We're seeing a real shift in the nature of work, and one of the things that I know Ireland has been known for is just the resiliency and the adaptability of the talent pool there. Can you talk a little bit about that and the importance of that going forward?
Sure, thanks, Diane. So there's so much we could say about this. I won't. Obviously, we know that STEM is
in 2 minutes or less. Yeah,
absolutely. we know that STEM is critical, but the component we have to figure out, in addition to STEM, is creativity. And obviously, Ireland has a long history of creative enterprise, whether that's in literature or business. And so that crux of the matter is creativity, and how do we amplify and support that? I can think of some great Irish companies like Devonish in the agriculture space, where R&D and creative approach to R&D has been critical to Devonish's growth. I can think of Alltech, which of course was an Irishman who moved to Lexington, Kentucky, founded the company, and then reinvested back in Ireland. I call that the re-diaspora. And so when you find people, standard bearers like that, who show their creativity in the things that they do, how do we connect them with the younger generation, the new generation? And frankly, also, Diane, all of us of every age, as the world changes so quickly. So I just throw that C word in with the STEM, and I think our answer is there.
Excellent. Well, let me ask each of you to give some final thoughts to our audience out there, and thank you, of course, to those who are joining us. Steve, I'm going to go to you first in terms of what message you want to convey, and also if, any hints, of course, of what you're doing next. We welcome that.
Thanks, Dan. I think we're going to be busy for a little while, so we're not doing too much in the next 12 or 18 months. I do want to, just before I say, pay tribute to Julie and to Dan. Enterprise Ireland's been a wonderful supporter of ours, and I would commend any company to engage with Enterprise Ireland and what they've been able to do and how they've been able to help. They've been a very big part of ICON's success over the last 30 years or so. So I do want to acknowledge Judy. And of course, Dan also is someone who gets around a bit. He was actually, the last time I saw Dan was at our business development meeting in Boston. And last year we had the best year we've had ever from a business development. So I'm thinking as Dan gets out of the diplomacy business, we're going to get him involved as an account executive or a head of our business development. But to be a little serious, I think from my point of view, in terms of the opportunity here, I would say, I mean, Rob made a really important point, I think, earlier on in the broadcast, and that was that the Irish, we do tend to punch above our weight. We're open. We're honest. We really give it a shot. We're not concerned about others. We're very open facing, and that punching above our weight, I think, is a very important component of what we've done as ICON. And I would commend that to anyone listening, to be bold. Coming out of this pandemic, we have, I think, significant opportunities to develop our business in whatever sector we're in. And I would say, step forward, be bold, continue to punch above our weight and really move forward and take the opportunities that present themselves, I think, going forward. There's only, as Rob again said, it's probably the first time that we're coming out of the first lockdown, so to speak. We have opportunities here that we'll never have again. Take them and move forward.
Rob, I'm going to go to you next for any sort of final thoughts for framing this.
Well, I'm going to build on what Steve said, and also the spirit that Dan and Julie bring to this. First of all, a great Chicagoan, Daniel Burnham, said, "Make no little plans, for they fail to stir the hearts of men." And we need to think about that as we come out of this pandemic. The second point I'll make is life is really short. And as you think about where you want to spend your time, who you want to be not only doing business with, but spending time personally, look for people and places you can trust that get the job done. And by the way, are a lot of fun.
Excellent. Julie?
Well, I'm going to go back to the point that Rob was making about creativity, because actually, and I started earlier today talking about innovation, And I think one of the things that differentiates the Irish, and there's always a lot of focus on STEM, and then people talk about STEAM and bringing the arts into it. And I think creativity is something which we're good at. And I think if we are going to continue to grow on a global stage, it is going to be innovation led. All the common factor between all the great Irish companies that succeed globally, they're focusing on innovation and they're creative and they're prepared to go for it. So I suppose I'd say just go for it.
Excellent. And I'm going to give the last words to you, Ambassador Mulhall. Take as long as you want.
I suppose at my stage, I'm obliged to look back over 40 years of my diplomatic career, because it's kind of, it's a perspective that I obviously, you know, is there for me all the time. And when I look back at that, when I started off in the early 80s as a young diplomat in New Delhi, Ireland was essentially at that time an agricultural country. It was still a country that, you know, 2/3 of our exports at that time went to our nearest neighbor in the UK. Now it's about 13%. 2/3 almost of our exports were agricultural. Now it's probably less than 10% of our exports agricultural. So I've seen a transformation in Ireland over that time. In 1980, when I first went to India, had I given any encouragement to an Irish company to invest in India, I would have been sacked and brought home and put into detention probably. But now, of course, it's a different world in which we live in. And we know that we have benefited greatly from American companies coming to Ireland and helping transform our economy, along with our membership of the European Union. But we know that if our economy is going to prosper in the future, it has to be through a combination of bringing in technology and capital and ideas from outside, because we're a small country and we don't have the monopoly of wisdom, obviously. But it's got to be a combination of that on the one hand, and Irish companies growing their businesses on the other. And that's why I'm so committed to working closely with Enterprise Ireland in their mission to grow the Irish-owned sector of our economy and turn that sector of the economy into an internationally connected part of our economy, because that's the only way forward for us. I've also seen our country become far more ambitious about itself and its future, and that's epitomized by our current membership of the UN Security Council, where we have we managed to get elected to the Security Council up against very tough competition, because we put the resources, the effort, and the vision into convincing other countries around the world that we would be best placed to represent their interests for the next 2 years in the Security Council. I've also seen our presence in the world expand dramatically. Enterprise Ireland has more offices abroad now, far more than it had when I first started 40 years ago. When I joined the Foreign Service, we had about 25 missions around the world. We're now over 90 and we're heading for 100. And there's a global Ireland perspective now, which really excites me, because we are now seeing ourselves as a country that has ascended the ladder of success. But we know that that ladder is not secure, because the world is changing rapidly and we have to remain ahead of the game, which is why we're investing heavily in research and innovation. It's why we're putting extra resources into our agencies like Enterprise Ireland, so that they can bring home to people around the world the power of the Irish advantage, which they promote. So I'm a natural optimist, but I do think that the story of Ireland during the course of my career in the Foreign Service is one that gives ample justification for a deep well of optimism. And that's what carries me into the future. Although I'm fully cognizant of the risks and the dangers coming from, climate change and the disruptions that will cause the ravages of a pandemic. We don't know how that's going to impact long term on the geopolitics of our world or on the economy of Ireland, the US, and Europe and beyond. But I take forward into this uncertain new period a sense of optimism based on my experience of how far Ireland has come over the last 40 years. And I think we can be, in a way, an example to other countries around the world of what is possible to do by investing in education and developing our resources to the point where we're now able to play the kind of role in the world that I'm delighted to see us playing. And I'm proud to represent a country that has made such strides over the last 40 years.
Great. I cannot think of a better place to end than there. Be bold, be optimistic, and of course, raise a glass to Ireland. So I would like to, of course, thank the Taoiseach for joining us, and thank you, Julie, Bob, Rob, Dan, and Steve, and Enterprise Ireland, of course. And thank you to all of you out there, whether you're Irish, a friend of Ireland, and the two other people who slipped into the call, you should be a friend of Ireland. I'm Diane Brady, and thank you very much. More discussions to come, and look forward to when we meet again in person. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thanks.